Hi, and welcome to Sequential Artifacts, a series about comic book history and culture, profiling comics from my personal collection. As I've mentioned previously, I'm a documentary filmmaker. I love the genre for lots of reasons, and one of those is documentary's connection to the very birth of cinema. In the late 19th century, something magical was happening. From Edward Muybridge's early experiments, including the legendary horse race sequence, to Charles-Émile Renault's theater optique, a fascination with moving images was percolating across the globe.
Here, he could almost create the illusion of reality. From a toy in the home, his idea had grown into a form of public entertainment. Renault called it the theater optique.
Cinema is a global invention, one of inspiration and synchronicity. Sometimes influenced or copied, and sometimes quite by coincidence, cinema coalesced through developments by Wordsworth Donisthorpe and William Friese Greene in England, Max Sklodowski in Germany, and Louis Le Prince in France and England. They all made pioneering contributions to the development of devices that could capture and display moving images. The oldest known surviving film is Le Prince's October 14, 1888 film, Roundhay Garden Scene. It is only 3 glorious seconds long. Of course, while these inventors' works were essential to the birth of film, their advancements were overshadowed by the titans of motion pictures. Thomas Edison and W.K.L. Dixon in the United States, and Auguste and Louis Lumière in France. Their ability to patent, produce, and exhibit has made them cinema heroes today. The earliest films were depictions of everyday life, the first documentaries. The early actualities, as they were called, eventually developed into longer narrative films as filmmakers learned to use this new medium to tell stories. And of course, these early films were all silent. I teach a course on silent film, and there's something mystical about the constraint of cinematic storytelling without any spoken dialogue. Silent films weren't really silent. Very quickly in the history of the public exhibition of films, theaters would accompany motion pictures with live music and sound effects. Silent films also used intertitles to help explain or move complicated narratives along. Spoken dialogue on screen wouldn't arrive until almost 40 years after the invention of motion pictures. And in that time, under the constraints of silent cinema, film birthed a new language of pictures in motion. And there's something quite special about that. If we jump back to Scott McCloud's Understanding Comics, we know he defines comics as juxtaposed, pictorial, and other images in deliberate sequence intended to convey information and/or to produce an aesthetic response in the viewer. And in that development of a definition, McCloud also tells us it doesn't have to contain words to be comics. But he does go on to say, words and pictures in combination may not be my definition of comics, but the combination has had tremendous influence on its growth. And indeed, words and pictures have great powers to tell stories when creators fully exploit them. McCloud creates distinct categories in which words and pictures combine in comic storytelling. They are word-specific. Pictures illustrate but don't significantly add to a largely complete text. Picture-specific. Words do little more than add a soundtrack to pictures. Duo-specific. Both words and pictures send essentially the same message. Additive. Words amplify or elaborate on an image, or vice versa. Parallel. Words and pictures seem to follow different courses without intersecting. montage. Words are treated as integral parts of the picture, and interdependent. This is the most common type of combination, where words and pictures go hand in hand to convey an idea that neither could do alone. But what happens when there are no words or sounds used in an entire comic book story? What kinds of narratives can be told under those constraints? There aren't very many today, but it turns out some pretty incredible stories have been created in silent comics. To clarify, silent comics means comics with no dialogue, no text boxes, and no sound effects. They are completely dependent on image alone, and some do it far better than others. One of the most acclaimed and influential series of silent comics is Moebius's Arzak. Without a doubt, the artwork is extraordinary and magical, but the experimental narratives didn't capture me like other comics have. More contemporary, and along those lines, is Ricardo Delgado's Age of Reptiles. Beautiful to look at, but it hasn't connected with me, though I'm sure it has with many of you. Of course, there's a strong tradition in European comics of pantomime, as well as early newspaper comics, which spawned silent masterworks like Milk Gross's He Done Her Wrong. Likewise, there are a number of contemporary silent graphic novels like Sean Tan's The Arrival, and the surreal indie treasure Frank by Jim Woodring. And don't get me started on any of the woodcut works by Lynd Ward. I love early 20th century American illustration. I could go on and on. I haven't even mentioned Spy vs. Spy. But for this episode, I want to concentrate on American, single-issue, mainstream comics. In 2002, Marvel proposed the challenge to creators to produce silent comic book issues as part of its Nuff Said series. I wasn't impressed with much of them, mostly because they seemed to lack purpose, but a few were extraordinary. Take Peter Milligan and Mike Allred's X-Force number 123. It's a trippy masterpiece inside the mind of Dupe. However, and I'm going to be a stickler here, it won't be on my list because there is a sound effect of a clock used throughout. The Incredible Hulk number 35 was quite good as well. It had an old school Incredible Hulk CBS TV show vibe. With that in mind, before I get to my favorites, I have a few attempts at silent comics that are worth mentioning. The earliest experiment in silent comics that I am aware of is in Atlas's astonishing number 14 in a story titled Silence. I have a reprint of it in America's Greatest Comics number 6 from 2003. Once again, it's silent until the big reveal at the end. It's a great Last Man on Earth story. Some other early experiments in comics come in the evergreen series of titles that makes up the vast Archie universe. There are two stories that I'll mention first, but fall just outside of my scope of silent comics. They are the July 1961 story Shhh in Archie number 120 and 1962's Movie Madness in The Adventures of Little Archie number 22. Both are great, and are mostly silent until the final panels when dialogue is used to deliver the punchline on why the stories have been silent up to that point. However, there is only one Archie story that gets it done, and that's in the 1967 issue of Betty and Me in a story called Shhh with an extra S. I suppose for extra quietness. In it, Betty wakes up on Friday the 13th, and in an effort to avoid any bad luck, she inadvertently sets off a chain reaction of mishaps for everyone around her. While it does create a completely silent story, silence doesn't serve the comic in any necessary way, and I think that's what makes the best silent stories, when the device is fully integrated and is essential to the narrative. Another footnote in my list is the 1982 Weird War Tales starring the Creature Commandos number 109 issue. It contains a really short story called Silent is the Grave. It's actually quite great. In 2 pages and 11 panels, it tells a complete World War I story in very much the EC style. It would make my best of list, but it uses sound effects, and to great effect I might add. But again, if I'm to be a stickler, this is a list of completely silent comics. Also worth mentioning are 2 issues from Matt Fraction and David Aja's Hawkeye. Neither are completely silent, but Fraction writes some very clever silent sequences in issues 11 and 19. If I were to cheat on my rules, at the top of my list would be the Nuff Said issue of New X-Men number 121. It's an absolute masterpiece of a silent comic book written by Grant Morrison with art by Frank Quitely. The rationale for silence is baked into the story. It opens with Jean Grey putting her fingers to her lips, silencing Cyclops and Wolverine, as she and Emma Frost attempt to enter Professor X's twin sister, Cassandra Nova's mind. It's Morrison and Quitely at their best. If you don't have this issue, I suggest getting it, and while you're at it, actually get the whole series of New X-Men. Also among those cheats would be the miniseries Step by Bloody Step. It's pretty much a silent comic, though there are alien language word balloons throughout. The art and coloring is gorgeous in this series. I also highly recommend it. Lastly, and this one kills me because I want it to be on my official list, is the 1989 Byrne and Aparo Batman number 433 issue. It's part of the Many Deaths of Batman 3-part story arc, and it's the best issue in the story. From the cover on, it's a great opening issue. There are a couple of sound effects, but what really puts it over is that Jim Gordon has to open his big mouth on page 19. Now yes, it's a moment of heaviness and plays really well as Gordon is left alone with the corpse of Batman, or so he thinks. But it puts the kibosh on this being a completely silent comic book. Now on to my top 5 silent comic books. I can't really rank these per se, but there is a clear number 1, which I think you can probably guess, and we'll get to that later. 2 issues that are fully silent and crafted to perfection as part of the Nuff Said experiment are the Marvel Knights imprints, The Punisher number 7, and Daredevil number 128. Each is masterfully executed, with a reason for being silent fully baked into the story. On the second page of the Daredevil issue, Bendis leans into the sensory experiment, as he has our blind hero, Matt Murdock, using his heightened senses to sniff and touch a note left by Elektra. As Daredevil is without sight, the reader is without sound. The note tells him there is an open bounty on his head. The rest is great visual storytelling. In Steve Dillon's Punisher submission, he writes and draws a self-contained story that's classic Punisher. Brutal and terse. All walk, zero talk. What makes this issue so spectacular is that Dillon paces and edits the story like it's a film. Scenes cut before assumed dialogue is spoken. As readers, we know Frank has received information that would require speaking and leads him to the next story beat, but it appears off-page. It's kind of brilliant. The next 3 comics in my top 5 are not part of the Nuff Said series. The first is X-23, number 21 from 2012. With art by Phil Noto, one of my favorites, the silence in this issue is perfect for the setting, the snowy wilderness. Laura Kinney is soul-searching in this issue, and the story moves between waking and dreaming and the spirit realm. It's quietly immersive. Next comes an issue from the excellent Batman and Robin series by Peter J. Tomasi and Pat Gleason. In issue 18, titled Requiem, Bruce and Alfred are wrestling with the death of Damian Wayne. It's an issue about grief, and the silence gives the story a weight that the reader feels as well. Lastly, and really the number 1 silent comic book of all time, is the inimitable G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero number 21 by Larry Hama and Steve Leialoha from 1984, titled Silent Interlude. Hama has said of the issue, "I wanted to see if I could do a story that was a real, complete story, beginning, middle, end, conflict, characterization, action, solid resolution, without balloons, captions, or sound effects." This groundbreaking issue focuses on Snake Eyes and is the very first appearance of Storm Shadow. As Snake Eyes is mute, a silent comic whose story is essentially an infiltration and rescue mission is the perfect method for telling this tale. The pacing, the composition, the art are all quite perfect. When done well, a silent comic book can be sublime, leaving the reader